Rogue Knight by Illuviar. 151. Chapter 37, Parts 3 and 4. =RK equals. Part 3, Operations Room, GARHQ, Coruscant. We're being jammed. Landlines are out. The young lieutenant overseeing the comms exclaimed, "Put the base on alert. We're either under attack or soon will be." Obi-Wan ordered, "Worry about that later. Let's make sure we won't end like the previous high comm staff," Kenobi whispered. The Jedi's hand went for the handle of his blade, and he turned around to face the door. "I have the sneaking suspicion you've got something to do with this, Master Teen." Valentra narrowed his eyes at the newcomers. "General Valentra, General Kenobi." The horned Jedi nodded. "It's good you're both here. You're under arrest for treason." That accusation gave anyone pause, though it didn't do much to stop the rising anger of the officers in the operations room. "Stand down," a clone shouted from the corridor behind Tien. That's when all hell broke loose. One of the officers drew a blaster and Tien's people opened fire. R&D complex. "Dr. Zash, you've got a visitor." One of her assistants called over the comm. She turned away from the table where she was examining an ancient device with yet undetermined function and smiled at one of the cameras in her lab. "By all means, send them in." The door hissed open and a small hunched figure hobbled in. "Master Yoda, to what do I owe this pleasure?" Zash's words were pure sarcasm. "Surprised you're not," the Jedi Master stated the obvious. "I had a feeling my day work would be disturbed this afternoon." "Sidious?" Yoda asked. "Never heard of that. Some kind of STD, it sounds like it," Zash mocked. Yoda's ears flattened along his skull. "Dark the time is. Too powerful the Sith are. Stopped you must be." Yoda's voice had a melancholy echoing with each word. "So, it's not illegal by the Republic's own laws." Zash chuckled in delight. "RK equals. Secure room, Chancellor Suite, Senate Building. I want an explanation now." Palpatine glared at the captain in charge of his security detail. "I don't appreciate being manhandled in my own office." "I was told yes, and I should be getting a briefing on that situation right about now." The Chancellor narrowed his eyes at the clone. "We just got unconfirmed reports about more attacks. Communications are down due to jamming. QRF should be rolling in soon. We believe it's another separatist raid meant to disrupt us while their offensive is underlay," the soldier reported. "Thanks to you it's succeeding," Palpatine snapped. He closed his eyes and took a moment to get his temper under control. Since the last night the Force had been constantly shifting. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, yet Sidious had been unable to narrow down any details. Was it the Separatists pulling off some new stunt? The Jedi acting up? The Senate or even Vale or Zash pulling a fast one? "Confirm that," the captain ordered as he listened to something over the comm built into his helmet. "Good for them. We're at lockdown. The primary can decide if he wants to see the prisoner when the situation becomes clear, and we're secure." "An attempted breach of the building. 2 Jedi Masters coming to see you intercepted it and captured its leader, Count Dooku apparently. They asked to meet you anyway and to present you the prisoner." The soldier shook his head. Dooku was supposed to be in Confederate custody, possibly dead even. Getting away and actually attempting an attack on the Senate, or even just trying to meet with Sidious in this building. That was sheer madness, nothing like what Tyrannus would do. The Chancellor kept his smile on and looked at the security detail surrounding him. 6 clones and 3 Jedi Knights who looked on edge. Sidious didn't dare access the Force right now to make sure, though he was convinced he knew what was happening. The Confederacy Council had indeed pulled a fast one. Covertly contacting the Jedi, handing Dooku after Palpatine made sure that all official attempts to do so fell through because he was convinced it was another separatist trap. The Jedi wanted to play for keeps. So be it. Palpatine switched on the recording devices and turned around along with his seat until his back was turned towards the security detail. Sidious' lips slowly twisted into a vicious smile. He let his mask crack and accessed the Force. The 3 Jedi in the room stiffened and Palpatine's smile grew, but now for long. Was that how the Jedi felt ever since the Sith began preventing them from divining the future? Sidious didn't appreciate the irony. It was time to see if he can properly turn this little trap against the people moving against him. Part 4, Republic Cruiser Without Fear. Multiple hyperspace events. Updating tactical. Bring the fleet to battle stations. Admiral Coburn ordered and fixed the holotank, with his eyes willing it to update faster. That's a lot of ships, a staff officer muttered. Much less than what's at Corellia, though. The man sounded relieved. It was humbling to think that there were 7 much more powerful ships waiting in reserve. Coburn frowned. The first moments of the engagement happened as expected. The sheer shock of the attack and the firepower his sub-formations could bring to bear shattered the light ships in their immediate vicinity. However, the enemy didn't hesitate. The Separatist fleet separated into sub-formations of its own and surged forward. They moved in such a way as to maximize the firepower they could bring upon the first echelon, while the bulk of their fleet simply avoided action and began spreading out. Second echelon, be ready to move. The enemy is picking up targets, Coburn ordered. Almost a quarter of the Separatist fleet jumped in the way of the Admiral's reserves, obviously to slow them down. After that, all but those engaging his first echelon made jumps toward various industrial sites, where they met smaller defensive forces and as much fixed defenses as could be spared. "What do you have up your sleeve?" Coburn asked aloud while he watched the unfolding engagement. CIC, 1st Fondor Sector Fleet Flagship. The Admiral looked to the right, where Tonith's hollow image floated awaiting orders. "I'll handle them." Tonith saluted and went to engage the main Republic fleet. "Coordinates locked in, Admiral," a tactical droid announced. Trench shifted his attention to the vanguard. They were swarming those cruisers, making sure they won't be using hyperspace to get away, however the price was heavy. Over there, ships were dying by the second, and that wasn't going to change until the behemoths were disabled. That only made the success of this operation even more vital. A failure would mean the Confederacy would be criffed up once and for all. =RK equals Yongling Training Center, Coruscant. "Yes, please follow me. We don't have much time," Yaddle offered in a sad tone. An attack. One of the clones stationed nearby overheard them. "Yes, I'm terribly sorry about this, young man." The Jedi Master waved a hand, and the clones hit the wall behind them hard enough to knock them out. Short version, Padawan. We finally figured out who is the Sith behind the war. It's Chancellor Palpatine. The Council is attempting to arrest him as we speak. It was also discovered that the clones had been commissioned by the Sith, and we expect them to side with them given the order. We need to get the younglings and other non-combatants to safety, because if the arrest attempt fails, the Sith will see us all along. Yaddle explained. The Jedi Master entered the younglings' part of the temple and smiled. "Gather around, children." She used the Force to add a touch of suggestion in her voice, and soon dozens of kids scurried forward. "We're going on excursion. Follow us and don't separate no matter what happen, all right?" "Yes, Master Yaddle," a chorus of excited agreements answered. "Let's go. We don't have time to waste," Yaddle ordered firmly. =RK equals Jedi Temple, Coruscant. "Master Dralig, is there a problem?" the captain overseeing security asked. He had seen some irregular movements by temple guards and had requested to speak with someone on the council, though so far his inquiries were rebuffed. He did put his men on higher alert just in case. "You can say so, Jake," Sin smiled sadly. "I need to ask you to stand down." The door opened, revealing more temple guards, who had their weapons drawn and activated, pointing them at the clones stationed outside. "What is the meaning of this?" Jake asked. "We'll be leaving Coruscant and can't have any accidents happening," the Jedi Master explained. "I can't allow such a thing without clearing it with Command and the Chancellor," the captain pointed out. "I see. Well, we were afraid of that. Will you stand down peacefully?" Sin asked again. The temple guards either used the Force or their weapons to take out the clones manning the security center. "At least we have control over security," one of the guards pointed out. He was immediately proven wrong when alarms began screaming and the door behind them slammed shut. "Take out the computers," Sin shouted. He ignited his lightsaber and began slashing through the consoles, though he knew it was too little too late. "Sith damned. Get to our people now and take out any clones on your way." "We need to get away from Coruscant now," Dralig ordered. Phase 37, conflagration. Outskirts, attack. Echo ordered a heartbeat after someone on the other side figured out the ambush. One of his men slammed a fist over the control panel of the door, separating them from the side passage, leading straight at the enemy flank. Echo waved forward and charged with his brothers, following on his heels. The clone turned right and aimed his grenade launcher. He took just a couple of steps in the enemy's direction when an armored figure appeared at the end of the corridor, and he pressed the trigger. Whoever that was, they managed to duck before the resulting explosion, though Echo was sure they were caught in the blast wave. The echo of explosions and the ion discharges made hearing and scanners less than reliable, leaving the soldiers to rely on good old-fashioned Mark I eyeballs, though in the 501 case, most actually got upgrades in that department. In Echo's case, one of his eyes was artificial and able to see infrared, which helped him locate the enemy through dust and smoke obscuring everything. Echo glanced across the corner and ducked back when someone shot at him through the haze of the explosion. That part of the corridor was wrecked, opening it to the surrounding levels. =RK=. Fives led his own squad in another flanking maneuver. He had to move slower to let the replacements fostered to the 501st keep up with him and his two enhanced buddies. To say he was surprised that the ambush didn't go exactly as planned would be a lie. More often than not, the enemy tended to be inconvenient like that. Still, things began well enough. 2 rockets were sent down range by the newbies lugging the heavy weapons, then everyone threw a wide assortment of grenades to clear the way. "Go," Fives shouted. That at least appeared to be working. Even with a warning preventing a complete surprise, if that was at all possible, while the remnant were in enemy territory seeking contact with the GAR, the opening stage of the ambush went reasonably well. Multiple power-armored troopers were taken out before they could properly respond to the threat. "Smoke!" Fives snapped after hitting one of the people in power armor, only to see his shots being tanked by a shield. Staying in the open against such firepower was suicide. That was going to buy them a few moments. "Get to solid cover," Fives ordered more quietly. He got up and crawled towards Cypher's position. His shot actually hit, however it wasted itself on the shield. Seeing no other option, Fives pulled off the single thermal detonator he carried, activated it, and threw the explosive at the lumbering enemy's feet. That bastard then had the audacity to kick the detonator at the clone before literally flying back. Fives had a moment to register the sound of repulsors before lunging towards the live explosive. =RK=. Hex knew that with the 501st on his side, there simply wasn't a force in the galaxy that could stand on their way. That happy state of affairs continued until the Separatist fleet managed a breakthrough and landed forces in the city of his birth. Yet Hex was a member of the 501st. There was no enemy that could stop them. He was elated when the order to intercept the enemy finally came down the chain of command. Hex hungrily anticipated ambushing the hut-spawned bastards who came to ruin his home. Hex wasn't cheering now. He wasn't thinking about protecting his home either. The only thing on his mind was putting down the monster that blew apart 2 of his brothers and was advancing towards him and the rest of the squad, no matter how many times they shot at it. Then another brother went down, and there were only 3 remaining. They fought shoulder to shoulder, pulling back in good order and constantly shooting at the enemy. Its armor began melting from the constant fire. Instead of faltering, it actually flew forward, firing all the way. Hex was the only one fast enough to dive out of the way. His brothers were literally ran over and their broken bodies swept away. "Criffing die," Hex shouted. He saw red and threw his blaster away, then grabbed 2 grenades, disengaged the safeties, and pressed the triggers before charging at the armored monster who was turning his way. =RK=. Part 6. Tipoca City. Camino. Rex sprinted on the heels of the Jedi Master. He cleared the corner a heartbeat behind her and saw Shaak Ti thrust her left hand forward. The clone wasn't quite sure, though he thought he saw a shiver pass through the air down the corridor. This time he lost his gun. "Up and at them," the commander shouted. He jumped on his feet and grappled for his sidearm. Rex was relieved to see Shaak Ti using her powers to pull back one of the Jedi coming at his men. However, there was nothing left to stop the other. The enemy jumped off the wall and landed in front of the closest clone. His lightsaber came down, and Tio lost his head. Phil tried to tackle the Jedi, got suspended in mid-air for his troubles before that bastard impaled him. Sam, one of the new guys, screamed and charged the killer coming for them all. The Jedi finally paused. He clutched his fist and pumped it in the air. Sam flew up and with every motion slammed in the ceiling with bone-breaking force. The enemy lowered his hand, yet the young clone left hanging as if embedded into the metal. "Surrender. I won't ask again." The Jedi spoke for the first time. His voice was mechanical, likely thanks to the comm in his helmet. "Go to hell," Rex snarled. He picked up a pistol laying next to him and began firing. "You first." The Jedi shrugged and continued his march. Rex looked at his brothers. "General, we need to pull back now," the commander shouted. "Cass with me." Rex looked over his shoulder. "Run, fools." After all, Rex had seen Jedi die before. He knew they could be overwhelmed. When figuring out how to take out these bastards, he should have used General Vale as a baseline, not the Jedi generals he knew. "Criffet." The commander nodded at his brother. He activated the blade built in the right arm guard of his armor, took a grenade from his belt, and charged the Jedi. "RK equals. I don't think so." The Jedi Master parried a thrust from the younger-sounding female before sidestepping a slash aimed at her hand from her other opponent. "Your men are dying. You can't stop us. There is no shame in surrender. It will save your lives." The remnant Jedi tried again. Tai parried an attack, riposted, ducked, and weaved between the blades, seeking her flesh. She gathered the force around her hand and sent it forward as a battering ram aimed at the other woman. The Old Republic Jedi simply slapped the attack away, and the energy went to dent the wall, making the corridor ring like a gong. Tai faltered when Rex ordered a retreat. She dared glance back and winced. Most of the clones were dead or pulling back. Only Rex and one of his brothers still stood obviously ready to buy their brothers a few precious seconds. The Jedi Master closed her eyes and deactivated her lightsaber. Was this it? Was this how it all ends? Her anger grew hotter, and Shakti felt a surge of cold, soothing power rushing through her. She thrust her hands forward. The new energy flowed through her arms and discharged in a massive shockwave, more powerful than anything she had managed before this day. Tai raised her weapon for one last strike, however it never landed. In the last moment, she was pulled back, and her lightsaber slashed through the floor between her and her victim. The Jedi Master looked back to those who denied her vengeance. Behind them, their friends were getting on their feet and turning T's way. Tai went past the clone, grabbed his arm and dragged him towards the end of the corridor. Blaster bolts began wheezing past them, something blew up behind, and finally they were going past the corner and getting out of sight. Tai bit her lip and pushed herself to move faster. She could hear the sound of approaching armored feet. 153. Chapter 37. Part 7. Phase 37, Conflagration, Coruscant. Yet even after all that happened, even now that the proof stared him in the face, Obi-Wan struggled to believe it. Jedi turning against the Republic at this time? It was unthinkable, sheer madness. Kenobi never got the opportunity. A grenade flew his way and Obi-Wan acted without thinking. His hand snapped up, guiding the Force to stop the weapon before it could reach a group of officers taking cover behind a row of consoles in the back of the room. Before Obi-Wan could send it back, Teen used the opportunity to push the grenade closer to Kenobi. Teen jumped at Kenobi and forced him back before stepping past the former Jedi and made him turn his back to the Cathar soldiers at the door. At that moment, Obi-Wan's mid was crystal clear. He parried a stab, pushed away a thrust aimed at his heart, and whirled in place, sweeping his lightsaber in an arc around him. The Force guided his blade and allowed him to deflect most of the blaster bolts coming at him. A few missed when he moved away from where the enemy anticipated him to be. Kenobi drew on the Force as much as he could and pushed the searing pain away. He rolled away from a blaster barrage, a choking cry escaping from his lips as the shrapnel in his side moved tearing at his flesh. At least when he jumped on his feet, Obi-Wan had Teen between him and the enemy soldiers, which spared him from getting shot again. The Jedi Master paused. He looked at Kenobi, then glanced around and winced. Then Obi-Wan moved, frantically parrying Teen's onslaught. Satine's face flashed before Kenobi's eyes. He put everything he had into keeping Teen's lightsaber away, and for a few seconds they were evenly matched. However, Obi-Wan was getting weaker, slower. He had to fall back, relying on his Sorsu's superb defense. That bought him a few more seconds before the Jedi Master dashed boldly at his former comrade and locked their weapons together. Obi-Wan got his good arm up and caught the lightsaber's blade in his hand. He channeled all the force he could still grasp into his palm and stopped the weapon cold. "This never should have happened, Obi-Wan," the Jedi Master whispered. "You were one of our best, a beacon of light in this dark galaxy." The Jedi shook his head in regret and slowly walked towards Kenobi. Obi-Wan closed his eyes and thought about Satine. If he was about to die, he wanted his last thoughts to be about the woman who loved. Thinking about what was happening, about Jedi fighting against Jedi, that was simply too painful. It was testament to his failure. The angle changed, and Satine's image became blurry. She looked different, regal. Her hair was made up and fell like a golden waterfall around her shoulders. Satine was looking at a tall granite pillar covered with carved-up names. His wife took a step closer and gently traced one of them with a finger. Kenobi's eyes snapped open, and he looked up at the Jedi Master towering above him. Tien had his lightsaber raised and ready to plunge it in Obi-Wan's heart. Their child, his mind supplied. Finally, Obi-Wan understood the choice he made back on Mandalore, his wife, his unborn daughter. They were what mattered. They were the reason he turned his back to everything he knew, everything he had been taught to believe in. Kenobi stared at the small, smiling face of his daughter. The very idea that he might not be there for her made him furious. It was unacceptable, unthinkable. The moment passed. Raw, unimaginable power surged through Obi-Wan. His anger fueled the dark side. His love to Satine and that tiny angel he already loved with his whole heart made the light side literally blaze within him. "Impossible," Tien exclaimed. He glanced back at Obi-Wan. At the end, the former Jedi was like an open book. Tien had no doubt left that Kenobi had fallen. The Jedi could feel the dark side practically leaking from the man before he blasted him away. Yet somehow he was not only using the light side too, but they were in balance within Kenobi. Tien closed his eyes briefly. The Council was mistaken. He was wrong. Whatever Kenobi was, he hadn't fallen. He was no Sith. He didn't deserve to die for a betrayal which he might very well be innocent of. Another of Tien's men fell to the clones. He felt the Force tremble. Jedi were dying. The Jedi Master could feel it. The galaxy was growing darker. He had been a fool. He was responsible for leaving the Order. The Jedi as a whole, no choice but follow him in this madness. Tien snarled when he felt the cold touch of the dark side. He could sense its triumph as good men and women died. At that moment, Tien knew. He had been deceived, betrayed. "Follow me." "We're leaving," Tien shouted to the few Cathar commandos still on their feet. "Grab the wounded. I'll clear up a path." Tien strode in front of his remaining men and began deflecting the incoming blaster bolts. He found he didn't particularly care if the dark side was aiding him right now. He was a failure as a Jedi anyway. No matter what happened, Tien was the one who ultimately led to countless Jedi dying right now with more to follow. He screamed his frustration, his despair at the clones in front of him. The dark side responded and turned his wordless shout into a physical force that threw those nearby off their feet. The Jedi Master caught another soldier in a telekinetic grip and crushed the poor bastard, then continued striding forward. His lightsaber danced, guided by the Force, and sent back every shot coming his way to its sender. Those wearing the new armors merely tanked the reflected firepower. Yet half the clones were clad in the old Phase 1 suits, and they began falling one after another. Tien caught a blaster bolt aimed at his heart, took a step forward and slammed the energy in the chest of a clone, unlucky enough to be in his way. The man gave out a chocked scream as the blaster shot burned through his armor and seared his chest. Tien let him fall and impaled the next clone that came in range. A chocked laugh escaped his lips. The dark side was truly an insidious bitch. A blaster bolt slipped past Tien and hit one of his men in the head, killing him instantly. All Tien knew was the need to get his people out, and the dark side's mocking laugh. The bitch had won. Phase 38, their finest hour. equals RK equals. Security Center, GARHQ. Colonel Zack was staring at multiple screens, showing the same thing in stunned disbelief. One moment everything was quiet, then all landlines were suddenly down and the HQ was put under jamming field. "Hey, check the ops room," another exclaimed. "Put it on the main screen," Zack snapped. A group of soldiers in what appeared to be modified Phase 1 armor were at the entrance and pointing blasters at the clones stationed there. "Security teams to the operation room, on the double," Zack snapped. "Where did those bastards come from?" The colonel frowned, then he snarled. "That Jedi Hutt-spawned." He switched in Mandalorian for some juicy curses. "I want everyone who came in with Tien located and security dispatched to arrest them. Lethal force is authorized. Burn through the jamming. We need to sound the alert." Zack spat. "I bet we aren't the only ones hit." The clone paused. The closest security team made it to the corridor in front of operation and were immediately engaged. The two brothers at the door were gunned down. Then a firefight exploded within the HQ's nerve center too. "Have more security sent to operations. Medics too, they'll need them," Zack growled. Equals RK equals. "We're receiving confirmation from our agents. Broadsword is green. Reaper is green." "Proceed. I'll be in position in time. Good luck, Agent." The director's electronic ghost vanished. "You heard the boss, lady. We're a go," Kelly ordered. She brushed a hand through her short black hair and cursed quietly. "What did you expect? That we would stand by and let the Sith ruin the whole Republic just like they did with my world?" A short woman sneered. "What happened to Tarsis was a tragedy, but it was done thousands of years ago," he began. "We've all agreed that the Sith can't be allowed to gain more control over the Republic no matter the price. That's why we're here." Kelly spoke quietly, yet conviction rang with every word. "We all know what would happen if they're not stopped. Our worlds still bear the scars from the last time. We stop them now. Carry out your orders." "Command channels are infiltrated. Reaper has green light. I'm sending the orders." An agent who had been content to simply listen announced. Equals RK equals. Reaper flight. High orbit above Coruscant. "Damn the Jedi and the Hutt they crawled from." Captain Vigo snarled when he got the order to execute his mission. He was leading a Y-Wing squadron on a training flight that accidentally would bring them close to the Coruscant Defense Fleet's flagship, a cruiser that Oni apparently suspected of being suborned by Jedi who might be trying to pull of a coup today. When he had been given the orders a few hours ago and got an explanation what might be happening planet-side if Oni and SIB criffed up an operation aimed at traitors among the Jedi, Vigo found it hard to believe. Surely even the Jedi wouldn't be that crazy, right? Then he remembered Skywalker's stunt and other horror stories he had heard from buddies stationed at the front lines. The clone increased the speed of his fighter and slightly changed course. It wasn't quite an attack vector aimed at the flagship, though it was close. He looked up from his instruments. The Republic, flagship of the Coruscant Defense Fleet, was already clearly visible. "Reaper 1, Republic Actual." The clone on the comms sounded amused. "You should buy us a drink first, before ogling us from this close." "Go," Vigo ordered and hit the afterburner. The captain put his Y-Wing into a steep dive towards the Republic and activated the targeting systems of his bomber. Another flick of a button and the weapons were online too, the whole load worth of ion bombs. "Reaper 1, break off," Republic Actual exclaimed. "Sorry, brother. I hope you make it thorough, all right," Vigo answered. Their target began lighting up targeting sensors. Any moment now, the Guardian would be coming online. Vigo's comm beeped as he received a fleet-wide priority message. He switched channels to listen while making his best to get out of the Republic's squadron range before they got over the shock and began shooting. "This is Director Ivan Fell from ONI. Coruscant Defense Fleet, you're ordered to stand down. A Jedi coup is in progress on the surface. Multiple GAR ground and naval units have been compromised. As we speak, ONI and SIB units are conducting operations to apprehend the traitors. Until your loyalty to the Republic can be made certain, you're to stand down. Keep your weapons and shields off. Any aggressive move will be considered a clear and present danger to Coruscant and her people, thus dealt with accordingly. I repeat." Some ships simply remained frozen in their positions. Others either received conflicting orders of their captains, had no intention to stand by, while a potential coup was going off on the world below them. Within minutes, elements of the Coruscant defense fleet, the orbital defenses, and an Oni squadron that just exited hyperspace began shooting at each other. Some of the Oni ships launched assault shuttles that ignored the fight in orbit and accelerate towards Coruscant. Zash's lab, Republic R&D complex. Coruscant. Those words stopped the Jedi in his tracks, and he looked at the Sith with wide, horrified eyes. She saw the understanding in his gaze and laughed. Yes, it's been a long time since I got a Jedi to run around in. Zash beamed. Yoda's features hardened. He leaned forward, and his fingers closed around the hilt of his lightsaber in a death grip. Such a blind fool I was, Yoda whispered and glared at the Sith. End you today, I will, Sith. Come on, Zash bid him to approach. Come and try. She smirked. Purple lighting whipped from Zash's blood and flesh hand and struck the Jedi mid-flight. He bounced from it and touched the ground for a mere heartbeat before jumping at the woman. Yoda's lightsaber moved like a buzzsaw, ready to render the Sith limb from limb. That's it! Come on, you can do better! Zash continued to laugh. She parried a lightning-fast slash, leaned away from another, and her prosthetic snapped forward to tear a chunk of Yoda's robe. The Jedi barely avoided losing a bit of flesh before he was caught by a pulse of creeping darkness that made him jump away. He landed 5 meters from the Sith and threw away his overrobe. Yoda's eyes narrowed, and for a moment he literally glowed as he channeled as much of the Force he could. The dark side energy clinging to his body slithered away, and he took a deep, relieved breath. Powerful you are, Yoda admitted. The Jedi raised a hand and concentrated. All the lab station around the large room shook before they were torn away from the floor. Pieces of equipment began floating around them like asteroid rings orbiting a planet. Yoda's hand slashed down, and every single piece of equipment and furniture in the lab shot at Zash. Tendrils made of purple energy exploded from her body and began striking the floating furniture, then jumping from piece to piece until Zash stood in the middle of lighting web. She began humming happily to herself and jabbed a finger at Yoda. Following her command, every single piece floating around the Sith hurled itself at the Jedi. Triumph you shall not, Sith. Allow it I shall not, Yoda declared and pushed everything back at Zash. That's better. She clapped her hands, sending the furniture and equipment at the walls, floor and ceiling with enough force that everything shattered to pieces. The dark side energy discharged harmlessly away, only making the room appear cloaked in shadows for a few seconds before the still intact ceiling lights could chase away the brief twilight. Decline I must. Too busy being dead you will be, Yoda grumbled. Not by your hand. Zash laughed cheerfully. The Sith pointed her lightsaber at the Jedi. 6 spears made of light-devouring darkness formed in a circle around her weapon. I say jump. Even as he absorbed as much as he could, the lighting increased in magnitude. It made his palms sweat, then they began the tingle and smoke as the moisture began evaporating. Lesson number 1. Please pay attention, Zash ordered. Zash leveled her hand at Yoda and sent the small artificial sun flying unerringly at him. The Jedi Master used all the excess energy still running through his body to halt the incoming fiery death. The sphere halted in front of him, and it took all his strength to throw it to the side so it flew past him when Zash pushed harder. The plasma slammed into the wall, splashed over it and the floor, and began melting through them as it was cooling down. Determination you feel, Sith. Triumph you shall not, Yoda grumbled. Zash began walking towards Yoda, who used the Force to recall his lightsaber. The weapon had somehow survived the destruction of everything in the lab besides the Force adepts. You shall not pass, Yoda declared. You still here? You're trespassing, you know. Hey minions, where's security? We've got someone loitering in my lab. He trashed everything too, now that I think about it. Zash pointed at the Jedi Master. Before you receive any more lessons, you'll be paying for this. She waved at the empty lab and the melted wall. Mad you are, Yoda muttered. Me? I was simply minding my business, not bothering anyone. You're the one who barged in, threatened me, attacked me, and wrecked the place, Zash pointed out. No more lies, Sith, Yoda snapped. Oh my, what did you people do now? Forgot your medicine or something? Zash grumbled. Couldn't you wait to get yourselves killed until the current unpleasantries are over? I swear you Jedi have the worst timing. Yoda glared at the Sith. Your kind to blame is. Deceived us, Sidious did. What? Is that some kind of STD? Zash frowned. Yoda shook. More Jedi were dying, both at the Temple and Senate. Every lost soul sent stabs of pain through his heart. It created a void where the bonds with those people used to be. Every death made the galaxy that much darker, the light that much dimmer. Sith, mock us no longer. Played us, you did. The Jedi began talking slowly, thinking about what he was going to say. Set us up the trap you did and walked into it we did. Strengthening your control over the Republic you are, Sith. Stop you we will. Protect democracy we will. No new Sith Empire will rise, Yoda declared. This rings no bells, I'm afraid. If you can try saying it again. Basic. Zash spoke the last words slowly, as if she was talking to a young child. Are you going to attack me again, with no provocation? See, I'm unarmed. Zash levitated her weapon from where she attached it to her belt until it laid on the floor between them. Her lips twitched into a mocking smile and she raised her hands to show them to the cameras. Hey, speak about yourself. I'm neither a fool like your kind loves to make themselves into, nor blind, thank you very much. Zash grimaced. I don't look old, do I? If die we must, if hated we must be, so be it. Our duty we do. Until our last breath, the Republic protect we will. The Jedi Master continued as if he didn't hear her. While a Jedi draws breath, darkness triumph will not. Oppose you we will, Sith. Ah, so you're just an old-fashioned fanatic. Why didn't you say so from the start? We could have called some nice folks from the closest sanatorium. I hear they have some great pills to help you with your problems. Zash grinned. Or perhaps you just need to get laid. I hear that some Jedi get much more reasonable after that. Yes, that's it. Ashara certainly became bearable after some wild sex. Zash grimaced again. I'm not sure who would like to sleep with you, but this is Coruscant. Have you tried the better brothels in the lower levels? I remember this nice place back during the sack. I got a lot of fun there, while all the fools were running around shooting and stabbing each other. Zash trailed off. Was that enough to push the Jedi over the edge? His eyebrows, or, well, what passed from them, were twitching in sync already. Yoda sent her a malevolent glare that would make any self-respected Sith proud before shaking his head, crushing his anger, and jumped at her with an ignited lightsaber in hand. I tend to ramble. Zash jumped back to avoid a slash. Is this a reason enough you want to stab me with that little lightsaber of yours? Shouldn't you take me on a dinner first, or at least buy me a drink? The Sith grinned at the Jedi Master. A loud bang sounded, and the Sith was thrown back, flying one way, and her torn-off prosthetic spinning in a different direction. You'll pay for this, you little monster, Zash snarled and jumped to her feet. Her lightsaber, which laid forgotten on the ground, jumped in the air and ignited as if on its own will. The broken artificial arm did the same, however it was engulfed by crimson lighting that arched all over its surface. Zash pointed her hand at Yoda, who was on all four and still trying to recover. Blade and hand flew at him. The Jedi raised his arms and stopped the projectiles a moment before they pierced his flesh. The Jedi's defense faltered. The prosthetic arm escaped his grip and flew straight at his head. The Jedi managed to twist without killing himself on his own blade, yet he didn't escape unscratched. Lighting clawed fingers racked the side of his head and tore away his left eye along with a piece of his scalp. A choked groan escaped Yoda before a massive lighting fell from the ceiling and slammed him in the floor with bone-breaker force. The localized storm subdued, and Zash strode forward. Are you happy now, Jedi? You came here looking for a fight. Are you glad that you got what you wanted? Zash shook her head and schooled her expression to be one of sad resignation. The Sith walked next to the Jedi's smoking body and knelt to take a better look. Sensing that he was just alive, Zash smiled and whispered quiet enough that the sole remaining camera's microphone wouldn't catch her words. Do you know how hilarious it is to watch you Jedi dig your own graves, to see you've put yourselves in a position with no way out but death? Zash chuckled quietly. I should thank you, Master Yoda. Thanks to you, I've got the privilege to see not only the Republic, but the Jedi fall a second time. Even if I don't particularly care about our ancient conflict, I appreciate the opportunity you gave me. Yoda opened one bleary eye. This was probably the only truth that infernal woman uttered since Vale brought her to Coruscant. His lips twitched as he tried to speak. Yoda screamed as the energy he was pulling inside his body reached a critical point, and he began burning. His last conscious thought was used to hurl himself at the Sith. There was only light, which Yoda's dying mind embraced. The Jedi's body hit Zash, resembling nothing more than a ball of liquid fire, and splashed over her before it detonated with a strength not quite as much as a thermal detonator. 155. Chapter 38, Parts 3 and 4. Phase 38, Their Finest Hour. Part 3. Anakin jumped off the training ring and went to the only other flesh-and-blood occupant of the room. "What's happening?" the Jedi shouted. "We need to help him," Anakin said. "You'll be staying right here where I can see you." Skywalker stared at the clone, opened his mouth to say protest, then thought better of it and closed it. The Criff was happening? Equals RK equals. Mandalorian Embassy. What do you mean you can't establish connection with the Senate? Satine glared at the comm unit on her desk. Very funny. Satine sighed and pressed a few buttons. That's weird. She frowned and began fiddling with the comm. They should know better after that circus. Satine shook her head. The Senate's making noises about inquiries, investigations, or even the next year's budget. I'll believe it when I see it. Bo shrugged. When are you going to tell Obi-Wan the good news? She asked and looked pointedly at her sister's belly. Hey, Obi-Wan isn't like that, Satine protested. Why am I keeping you around anyway? Satine grumbled. I'm your favorite sister, Bo tried. The comm beeping interrupted their banter. Get him on the line now, Satine snapped and stood up. The sisters looked at each other with worry. The Senate, Satine exclaimed. They will need to arrest the Chancellor, won't they? Bo agreed. They apparently have allies too. She frowned at the thought. Your husband is a big boy. He should be all right. Bo continued. We need to go keep the government in one piece until the army gets its stuff together and comes to clean up this mess. Satine slammed a fist into her desk and winced before nodding slowly. We need the Republic for the time being. She agreed. If you're coming, you're getting in the best armor that fits you, and you'll stay with your security detail at all times, sister of mine. Bo looked Satine in the eyes, then glanced at her belly. Keep them between you and any lightsaber-waving maniacs too. Leave the crazies to us. Equals RK equals GARHQ Coruscant. Yes, I mean no. I won't be criffing up like that ever again, Anakin stammered. Anakin blanched. He would have felt it if Obi-Wan was dead, right? However, with the Force feeling like a gathering stormlight now, everything was concealed by the dark side, and the Jedi couldn't really be sure about anything beyond his general vicinity. Apparently, Obi-Wan simply wasn't close enough. Is Obi-Wan all right? Anakin exclaimed. You'd better, the sergeant muttered. Take point, we'll be right behind. Here, you might need this. The sergeant detached Skywalker's confiscated lightsaber and handed it back to the Jedi. Now go. The sergeant pointed in a general direction of the closest elevator. Part 4. Impossible, a Jedi exclaimed. What do you mean, Master Jedi? Palpatine asked in a cordial tone. If someone saw his face, they would have been disturbed by the hungry smile splitting it in two. Sidious laid a hand above the statue, hiding his lightsaber. At that moment he could swear that the weapon actually felt as hungry for the bloodshed they both knew was coming as the Sith Lord himself. It was an illusion, of course. The lightsaber was a tool, no matter how useful. Yet he could appreciate the sentiment that had to be coming from the dark side itself. It was high time the Sith got their vengeance. What is this nonsense? The captain snapped. We're here to protect the Chancellor. Nothing more, nothing else. Almost. Halt, the captain ordered. Stand down, soldier. This is General PL. We're here on Senate business. I can't grant you entry until the emergency is over, sir. Protecting the Chancellor is my only priority at the moment. The clone stated. What is the meaning of this, Master PL? Palpatine put a confused frown on his face. Chancellor Palpatine, In the name of the Republic Senate, we're placing you under arrest for high treason, for engineering the Clone Wars, for creating and abetting sedition. What nonsense is this? Palpatine showed some anger and snapped at his accusers. I seriously doubt that. Otherwise you would have done this through the proper channels, or at least presented it to the Senate in a full session. Palpatine snorted. The courts and Senate will decide that, Windu stated, before or after you've taken control of them. Forgive me if I'm suddenly lost any trust that I used to have in the Jedi Order. Besides, aren't you supposed to be out on the front lines along with a commando unit? Where are those soldiers, Mr. Windu? Palpatine continued to play along. They're delayed. The former Jedi Master answered quietly. For Sidious it was plain to see that the man was lying. Really? I know what this is. Palpatine glared defiantly at the Jedi. You're afraid that your dogmatic religion is threatened. General Vale shook your order to the core when he revealed what he was. You couldn't conceive of someone calling himself a Sith, not doing their best to see the galaxy burn, and instead standing up in the Republic's hour of need and fighting to protect her. You curse and decry him for doing your duty better than most of you could, Palpatine exclaimed. We suspect nothing, Sith. We know, Windu said, and his hand fell on his lightsaber. Your own apprentice told us everything. That I'm a Sith who had to hide himself to avoid persecution. I freely admit it. Please tell me this isn't the reason for this whole war. I can feel who you have in the back. Count Dooku, is he the source of your truth? Is this why most Jedi turned out to be useless commanders in the war? Were you always backing the Separatists in secret? Or were they your creation? Dooku never truly left the Order, did he? I refuse. I believe that doing so would be a suicide. Palpatine smiled sadly. The Chancellor turned at the clones who were covering the Jedi with their weapons. Stand aside, soldier. This does not concern you. Piel tried one last time. Try not to kill the clones. They merely do what they were taught to. Piel reached for his lightsaber. It's treason, then. Palpatine sighed. A pulse of energy exploded from Sidious and turned off all recording devices. The statue he was still touching shattered, and he grasped his lightsaber. 156. Chapter 38, Parts 5 and 6. Phase 38, Their Finest Hour. Part 5, Chancellor's Suite. It was only then that Sidious finally exploded into action. The closest Jedi Knight had just begun raising his lightsaber. The weapon wasn't even active yet when Palpatine flew at the human like a bat escaping the 9 Corellian hells, stabbed him in the face and baked his brain. Jedi Traitorous Guard number 2 was next, the only woman in the group. She actually managed to switch on her saber, yet wasn't fast enough to parry a slash that bit deeply in her side. Yet the sudden pain paralyzed her for an instant, and that was enough for Sidious to throw her at the wall hard enough to shatter every bone in her body. The Sith Lord was upon the last of the knights in his security details before anyone else could act. Lightsabers were ignited with the traditional snap hiss of burning air, and the clones opened fire. That confrontation should have been over almost as soon as it began. All but a handful of shots were reflected back, only to splash harmlessly over integrated shields. That state of affairs lasted mere moments before Master Piel rolled under the barrage and was suddenly between the soldiers. One tried to shoot him, another actually came close to kicking the Jedi with his armored foot. They had to pin him in place for a few seconds, and it would be all over. There were still a dozen Jedi Knights available to surround and swarm the Chancellor. Yes, this was going to be a problem. Sidious' grin went as wide as it could. It's been a very long time since he faced a real challenge in combat, and even longer since he could allow himself to enjoy such a thing. A Jedi Knight attempted to attack Sidious from the right, thought he was simply not fast enough. The Sith stepped past a swing and responded by impaling his attacker through the eye. So far, so good. Sidious used the Force to throw his massive desk at Windu, who was approaching from behind, and followed with concentrating his full attention on one of the Jedi Knights. The Zabrak female glared defiantly as she settled into a Sorisu stance. Sidious smirked at her and used all his power to telekinetically twist her head around. She tried to counter him, however the woman simply lacked the raw power to do so. He felt satisfaction when her head finished turning completely around and saw the shocked expression on her face. Next thing Sidious knew was that he was ducking under a sweep from Windu. Then he received a hit in the gut that sent him on his back. The other Jedi in the room used the opportunity to jump at him and tried to impale Palpatine. Sidious threw the corpse at Windu, which barely bought him enough time to surge to his feet, even with all the enhancements the Force was giving him. The Jedi glared at him. "You will not win, Sith," Windu snapped and went on the attack. "I'm doing pretty well, don't you think, Master Windu?" Sidious shot back and laughed. Yes, this was it. A worthy opponent at last. RK equals. Coruscant. Sidious' features morphed into an ugly snarl. His fun was about to be interrupted by the Jedi Knights, and were those armored Cathar of all people rushing into his private office. Fighting Windu in a single combat was one thing. It was simply incredible fun to finally face off against someone who could keep up when the Sith Lord went all out. Getting interrupted and possibly blindsided by a nobody, thus not only interrupting the fun, but potentially getting Palpatine wounded or worse, that simply wouldn't do. 5 more Jedi, 2 female humans, a Zabrak male, a Twi'lek female and a Rodian man approached cautiously, followed by half a dozen armored men carrying blaster rifles with a practiced ease. Windu pointed his purple blade at the Sith, and Sidious answered with a small flourish of his saber. To tell the truth, the Sith Lord was getting a bit tired. It had been too long since he had the opportunity to train, even longer since he was in a proper battle. If it wasn't for the Force helping sustain his physical shape since the war began, not to mention using it to enhance his capabilities, Sidious knew he would have been exhausted by now. While the fight hadn't been going for more than a couple of minutes, the Sith Lord had been expending a great amount of energy to kill off as many of the Jedi as possible while keeping himself intact. If he was facing just Windu, Sidious would be content to keep fighting for as long as it took. However, there were a lot of Jedi and their minions outside, and all it would take was for one of them to get lucky. "Did you get enough friends, Master Windu? Or should we wait for a few more to come in?" Sidious taunted. He hated ending his fun duel, however self-preservation took a precedence. Palpatine needed to buy time. The Sith had to dive through the door when the Force warned him of incoming danger. He moved a split second before a throw lightsaber slammed where his spine used to be. The ignited blade left a smoking hole in his shirt, however, it fortunately failed to bite into his back. RK equals. Mace Windu glared at the Sith Lord. Sidious was smiling mockingly at him. The murderer had the gall to taunt Mace after cutting down more than a dozen Jedi, most of whom were his friends. "This ends now, Sith," Windu declared. He let everything go. There was only the Force, the Varpad, the Sith and his Shatterpoint. Windu passed through the attack, which was cut off when he got in range of his enemy and went on the offensive. Every single one, the Jedi's actions were fueled by the dark side energy he stole from his opponent. Sidious might not be getting weaker, not yet. However, Mace was getting stronger every time he locked blades with his opponent. Then it finally happened. The Sith was forced to take a step back. Windu smiled grimly and took things even further. Jedi and Sith became dark blurs, illuminated only by the half-melted walls around them and the glows of their weapons. They fought for long seconds on an even footing until Windu slammed Sidious' blade aside with enough force to leave the Chancellor open. The Jedi's fist soared forward, surrounded by a visible sheath of telekinetic force, and slammed it into the Sith's chest. Sidious was thrown clear off his feet, landed heavy into a couch, tumbled over it, and spilled himself on the ground at the other end of the living room. Seeing an opportunity, Mace sprinted forward, determined to put an end to the madness. He barely cleared the entrance when all the furniture jumped up and flew at him. The Chancellor snarled at him and attempted to fry the Jedi once again. The incoming attack was so potent that it looked closer to a solid beam of dark energy instead of lightning bolts. Nevertheless, Mace was able to block it using his lightsaber and his Varpad. Windu had to take a step back, then another, before he was able to absorb enough energy to halt the assault and begin pushing through it. He was vaguely aware that Jedi Knights were cautiously entering the room and spreading out, preparing to jump at Sidious the moment the onslaught was over. If the Force was good, their help wouldn't be needed, and Windu was going to be able to finally end the Sith. He could almost taste victory. Sidious was getting desperate, weaker. Mace allowed himself a small smirk. He was close to discovering the Sith's shatter point, though Sidious might not last that long as things were going. Windu took a step closer to the Chancellor. The dark side attack began harmlessly surrounding him, yet it was either deflected or absorbed by the Jedi, giving him more raw power to work with. 157. Chapter 38, Part 7. Phase 38, Their Finest Hour, RK equals. Part 7, Chancellor's Suite, Senate Building, Coruscant. Just one more step. That's all Mace needed. He was almost close enough to end it all. Windu could already taste his victory. All he needed to do was to take the last step and swing down. The Jedi pushed through the Sith's desperate onslaught. Ice daggers stabbed into his back as lighting forks glanced off his armor. A cold wave passed through Mace. He could sense Sidious's shatter point. Just a few more moments and he would uncover it. It didn't matter. The Sith wasn't going to last that long. Windu finally took the last step. For a split second, he was blinded by a virtual wall of crackling lighting before the attack abruptly cut off, and he swung down his blade. It took the Jedi a heartbeat to comprehend that the Sith had somehow produced a lightsaber and was holding the locked weapons a hairbreadth from his forehead. Sidious used that small opening to regain the initiative. The blades became blurs that flashed when striking each other. Yet with every clash of the lightsabers, the Sith was forced a step back. It was time. The Jedi swung his weapon, aiming for a killing blow. Sidious raised his hands up in the last possible moment, and they were enveloped by lighting. The Sith unleashed it into a wide arc in a last desperate bid to save himself, all the while jumping back. Windu's purple blade went down a moment before a lighting bolt caught him in the left shoulder. The attack had enough power behind it to spin Mace in place and sent him falling on the ground. He didn't care. Before the lighting struck, Windu saw his blade slicing clean through the Sith's forearms. However, he cared very much when the floor lifted to meet his face and the world around him roared with the echo of an explosion. One quite powerful and close at that. The feeling of Jedi dying nearby came as an unpleasant confirmation that Mace was out of time. He had to finish the Sith now. Windu got to his feet and looked at the Jedi in the room. "I'll end it. Secure us a way out," Mace shouted. He hoped that they were able to understand him, because if the ringing in his ears was anything to go by, they were all half-deaf at best. Mace's position, looking towards the Chancellor's private office, gave him an excellent view of a wave of fire and screaming metal coming from the outer part of the residence. It was almost immediately followed by blaster blots and a couple of missiles that detonated almost immediately after flying through the door. Only a last-moment warning coming from the Force prompted Windu to avert his eyes and avoid being temporarily blinded. "Go!" he roared to the Jedi with him and turned to face the Sith. The Chancellor was in a sorry state. He was cradled his ruined arms in front of his chest and glaring balefully at everyone. Yet the madman had the gall to smile at him. "It ends now," Windu snarled and stalked towards the Sith. With every passing moment, more explosions could be felt, more Jedi dying. The Sith's lips moved, however Mace couldn't make up the words. All he knew, or really cared about right then and there, was the fact that Sidious had to die for everything he caused. The Jedi didn't consider or really care that a cold current was flowing through him. He had surrendered to the Force, became one with his Varpad, and now he would be its instrument in bringing it closer to the prophesied balance. Instead of feeling fear at his impending demise, Palpatine was shacking with laughter. Windu scowled. No matter. He raised his lightsaber and prepared to finish it. The Sith slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor. Mace grinned savagely. This, his enemy being on the floor waiting for the killing blow. It few fitting. It felt right. Windu's lightsaber descended, and instead of cutting through the Sith, he was whirling around and parrying blaster bolts flying at his back. The first few shots went to the walls and ceiling, though then Mace sent the following barrage back at the fool who interrupted him. The Jedi glared at a woman in scorched Mandalorian armor. She was using a wrist blaster to shoot at him while keeping two other Jedi at bay with a flamethrower built into her other arm guard. A surge of unrelenting fury rose within Mace. He didn't have time for this nonsense. The Sith behind him would recover any moment now and attack him. Windu raised a hand and channeled all the fury he was experienced through the Force without really thinking about what he was doing. The armored woman froze in place, then she was lifted up by invisible grip. Mace's clawed fingers clutched into a tightly gripped fist. The Force obeyed with some reluctance, and the woman's armor buckled, then collapsed a bit around her chest, breaking bones and driving them into her flesh. Mace left her fall to the ground and turned to finish off the Sith. Hopefully the other Jedi would be capable enough to keep the enemies occupied for a few seconds. "Fool," Sidious cackled from the floor, "do you think you just won?" At least now Mace could hear again, though it wasn't as if the Sith could say something worth listening to. Yet Windu found himself compelled to answer, "Yes, I really do." Mace used the Force to raise up Sidious and then slammed his lightsaber in the Sith's gut. "How does it taste, defeat?" Windu asked. He didn't know it at the time, yet his eyes were glowing sickly yellow, a reflection of Palpatine's own. "I might have lost," Sidious hissed. "You haven't won. The dark side has its due." Windu sneered. No matter what happens now, the Sith were done. He was convinced of it. There was no way that Vale would cold be more powerful than this monster, and Sidious was done for. "Can you feel it, Jedi?" The wheezed in a mocking tone. "All you did is ensure the dark side won." Mace snorted. He pulled out his blade and stabbed the Sith again and again. A monster like this shouldn't be getting a clean death. Besides, Windu's fury demanded something more. A blaster bolt slammed into his back. The Jedi's shield didn't activate, and the shot slagged a lot of his armor, making him stagger and let release the mauled Sith. Windu's furious gaze tracked the source of the blaster fire. His eyes fell on the prone figure of the woman whose chest he just crushed. She was still somehow conscious and had defiantly raised a hand to shoot at him. She had discarded her helmet, and that allowed Windu to recognize her. It was that Mandalorian, the redhead who married Vale. Despite being in obvious pain, despite the blood leaking from her mouth, or the fact that she was likely already dead and simply still clinging to life of sheer stubbornness, she was glaring defiantly at him. Then she shot at the Jedi again, though this time he contemptuously reflected her shot back, though it missed her face by a couple of centimeters, merely burning a bit of her hair. Windu glared murderously at her. Bloody Mandalorians! There were more of the fools engaging the rest of the Jedi in close combat behind the crippled woman. "Enough!" Mace shouted. His fury finally reached its boiling point. "Can't you feel it, Master Windu?" "You just lost," the Sith taunted again. As if such lies could... For the first time since engaging Sidious, Windu paused to properly think. Even through the red haze of his fury, he could sense the truth in the Sith's words, but that couldn't be. This was the shatterpoint of the Sith, of the dark side itself. Mace frowned, then forced his will upon the Force for the first time. He needed answers now. The world around Windu shifted subtly. The Force obeyed. His talent finally had enough time to work too. And he saw it. The shatterpoint of the dark side, both of them. He could have, should have just killed Sidious earlier. That was the best chance to break the dark side Mace would have ever gotten. Because now that he was aware of what exactly happened in the last few minutes, he knew he criffed up. Mace Windu was the dark side's second shatterpoint. He could see himself right now, his path forward from this moment on. It was shrouded in darkness. That realization almost broke the Jedi, but not quite. Number that was left for the third realization. For the last shatterpoint he didn't even knew was right here until it was too late. Mace stared at the broken figure of Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan Vale, that was her name now. She was the shatterpoint of the light. Vale's too, and she was dying because of a Jedi. By Windu's hand. Mace let out a single long scream that expressed all the desperation of a damned soul who saw their whole world die around them. He could hear the Sith's mocking laughter. He could sense the promise of the dark side. All he had to do was surrender himself to it, and the pain would be gone. Windu blindly threw his lightsaber at the Sith. Even without looking, he knew the blade impaled Sidious in the chest. With all his other wounds, the Chancellor was a dead man. The Jedi paid no real attention to Palpatine. Instead, his eyes were centered on the dying woman. While the Sith was finally silent, the same couldn't be said about the dark side. Mace could still hear it whispering quietly in the back of his mind. This madness was simply too much. Bo-Katan began choking on her blood. Mace could feel the veil of the dark side falling upon the galaxy, all because of his actions. He averted his eyes from the dying woman and fled. RK equals General Vale's quarters, Corellian cruiser Freedom, hyperspace. I was sitting cross-legged on my bed and meditating to gather my strength and clear my mind before the coming battle. I knew that no matter what we found at Camino, it was going to be ugly. My battle meditation might very well be needed before the day was over, and I was going to need every bit of strength I was left in such a case. However, my mind was far from Camino right now. For the past hour, the Force had been tremulous. The best way I could describe it was a real cauldron of storms, fury, fear, and anticipation. Something momentous was happening, and I was far away from a position to influence it. Criff Crimson, the fool who created it, and Palpy for unleashing the never-sufficiently damned thing. A few minutes ago, the Force began practically shacking from tremors. Jedi were dying, a lot of them. It was a sensation I was accustomed to from the war. The hell? Did Palpy decide to begin the purge far ahead of schedule, or did the Jedi try something particularly unpleasant at the worst possible time? I concentrated, pushed my will through the cauldron that was the Force, and attempted to divine answers. It took me some time, but eventually I was able to see some disjointed images. A pair of temple guards falling upon a clone patrol. A young Padawan, couldn't have been older than 12, screaming in fury and charging a whole platoon who had an elderly Jedi woman surrounded and were pumping shot after shot at her. Something that suspiciously looked like Obi-Wan bleeding on the ground. With each image I saw, my anger grew. Damn all Jedi, honorless bastards, the whole lot of them. I hissed and pushed yet further. I needed to know more. A huge dark presence revealed itself in the Force. It was like a beacon and not hard to identify. Palpy had done hiding, it seemed, and bloody hell, the sheer raw power I could feel coming from him. Suddenly I was glad I didn't do something dumb, like confronting him without a lot of backup. I dove through the Force towards Sidious's presence and was assaulted with another wave of images. I got glimpses of Palpy cackling madly and Jedi dying, of Windu engaging the Sith Lord and somehow managing to push him back. The dark side shook. It shifted and I could feel it watching me with anticipation. The next vision was a clear one. I saw my wife setting a Jedi on fire with a flamethrower. Good girl. The perspective changed. I saw Windu glaring at Bo, raising his hand. No bloody hell, then he simply crushed her chest. All I knew then was fury, which I channeled right back into the Force. My mind gripped the image, which was trying to flee, and I used it as an anchor to seek Bo through the Force. It tool almost everything I got, yet thanks to both the vision and Palpy's fading presence acting as beacons, I could locate my wife even if she was right across the galaxy. My mind brushed hers. I could sense her pain, her anger. It stroked my fury into a blinding rage. Not again. I wouldn't lose another wife to the criffing Jedi. I would see the galaxy burn before I allow it. I used the wisp of a connection we had and poured all my power through it. With one directive, heal. The Force surged through me, fighting to push even a tiny bit of energy through the vast gulf separating me from Bo. I felt as if my body was on fire and didn't care. Instead, I grasped for more and more power. I knew that a small trickle of healing energy somehow reached Bo, but that wasn't enough. I needed more. I pushed further and every cell in my body lit up with agony. I screamed but didn't stop. I couldn't. Palpatine's presence vanished, then the vision of Bo dying on the ground shattered, and my awareness was violently shoved back firmly into my body, was so hot I felt like melting. Sweat was leaking from every pore in my skin, and every rasping breath I could gasp sent red-hot daggers of indescribable pain straight into my lungs. I don't know how long I writhed in pain on the ground before my body could bleed off all the Force energy I was channeling without killing me. I was vaguely aware that if I had not gotten my body rebuilt back in the day, this experience would have killed me. It may still do it in the coming days and weeks. No, I snarled. I couldn't let myself die. I needed to find out what happened to my wife. If Bo died, I used my fury to push the agony away. The pain didn't matter. My wife did, making sure the Jedi, both new and old, pay for their crimes did. I used the wall to pull myself into a sitting position. My gaze passed over my hand, and what I saw gave me pause. I raised my arm, turned it around, and looked at my fingers. My skin was leathery, shivered. For the first time since I could remember, my arm looked like my real age. I slowly got up and dragged myself to the fresher. I was still burning and needed water. Mirror, too. It took me a minute to stumble into the fresher, gulp some water, and finally look at myself. An old man in his late 80s or early 90s looked back with two blazing yellow eyes. Yeah, I practically burned through my body all right. I just hoped I gave Bo a chance. That would make it worth it. Bo, damn it. I glared at the mirror. Despite the agony I knew it was going to cause me, I used the Force to activate the comm built in just outside the fresher. Officer of the Watch, this is General Vale. Have Admiral Holt meet me in the flag bridge in 30 minutes. I hissed and cut of the connection. I could no longer afford to waste any time on Camino, so it was time to change the plans. But first, I needed to brew myself an alchemy concoction that would allow me to operate without crashing for the next few days. With my body practically criffed up, I no longer needed to particularly care about the nastier long-term side effects of the more potent stuff I could create. My body wasn't going to last more than a few months at this rate anyway. 158. Chapter 38, Part 8. Phase 38, Their Finest Hour, equals RK equals. Part 8, Chancellor's Quarters, Senate Building, Coruscant. Sidious was dying. Even his mastery over the dark side wasn't enough to sustain his gutted body for long. It was only his anger, pain, and glee fueling the force within him that let him cling to life for so long. At least that allowed the Sith to see those Mandalorian fellas slaughter all the Jedi they could get their hands on. Sidious felt even more of the fools die outside of his sight, yet that Force-damned bastard Windu was getting away. The Chancellor snarled at the thought. The man killed him. He had to die for that. The bloody smile was back on Sidious's lips when his eyes fell upon the dying form of Vale's wife. That single fact somehow broke the light. The good general would be out for blood now. Sidious, for once, hoped that someone would succeed where he failed and kill Windu. Perhaps if he lived long enough, he could personally slam the last nail in the Jedi's coffin instead of relying on contingencies. Sidious chuckled, and that made his ruined lungs convulse, sending his body into a shacking fit. H used the pain to draw a bit more of the Force, though he was already feeling his power slip through his grasp. It wouldn't be long now, yet perhaps he could still have his chance. The fighting in the immediate vicinity was dying out. The Chancellor sighed. All he could do right now was cling to his life for as long as possible and wait. Hardly a fitting end for a Sith Lord. No matter. He would have the last laugh anyway. There were contingencies in place. One way or another, Order 66 would go to the clones across the galaxy, and that would be just the beginning. Soon after he died, all his blackmail material on the Senate would be released. In this situation, it would be more than enough to at least paralyze the Senate, throw the Republic into chaos, perhaps shatter it. Let Vale and whoever else was left pick up the pieces if they were strong enough. Sidious would have his revenge no matter what. The Chancellor's musings were interrupted by a new group of Mandalorians storming his private office. He saw most of them charge the few remaining Jedi who were fighting with their backs pressed to the wall where his desk used to be. Damn it, that was one nice and comfortable desk. Sidious chased that odd thought out of his mind and returned his attention on the Mandalorians. Two medics were busy tending Vale's life. She needs a trauma center right now. One shot at their apparent leader, another armored woman who was hovering nervously above them. What drew Palpatine's attention to her was the sheer fury he could sense coming from her. Ah, the Duchess. So much for her pacifism. Right now she felt deliciously murderous. Well, that at least proved that family was useful for something. That or a stasis pod. The other medic nodded, though none of them slowed down their ministrations. Do what you can, Satine snapped. The battle behind the Duchess was finally over. Palpatine gleefully saw the Jedi being shot to pieces and immolated with flamethrowers. That image by itself was enough to buy him a minute or two. It was that potent fuel for the dark side. Ambassador, the Chancellor wheezed. Now that the battle was no longer raging right on top of them, he could be heard. Barely. Satine's head snapped in his direction. She examined him for a moment, then shook her head. Yeah, his injuries were mortal. At least she deigned to come closer so she could hear him. We need more medics over here. Get some of the clones in here now. The Duchess ordered in her comm, then came and knelt to look him in the eyes. Chancellor. She nodded. Ambassador. Sidious was racked by another set of convulsions. You're dying, Satine bluntly stated the obvious. Thank you, I hadn't noticed. Palpatine's sarcasm was cut through by a coughing fit. Do you have a recording device? I have one last order to give. This treason can't be allowed to prosper. How did you know to come? Yes, they struck GARHQ first. A few troopers managed to get away and tried to raise the alarm, Satine answered. The jamming. Palpatine nodded. Kriff. We need more medics now, a clone shouted. The primary needs a hospital. A pause. No, I don't care. Get us reinforcements right now and shoot everything and everyone that gets in your way. The soldier snapped, then he made his way in the smashed living room. Sir. The clone trailed off when he could clearly see the Chancellor's state. I'm sorry, sir, we're too late, he added numbly. No matter, you stand as witness. I have one last order. Sidious rasped. Make sure it goes to the GAR at large. I will, sir. The clone straightened up. This is Chancellor Sheev Palpatine. Identification. It took almost everything he had left to dictate his codes without interruption. Most of the rest went into suppressing his coughing for long enough to actually give the order. The Jedi are executing a coup on Coruscant. I'm myself mortally wounded. GAR HQ has been attacked in an attempt to decapitate the military. Palpatine coughed out a coagulating glob of blood. The world was getting dimmer, distant. He put everything he had left to strengthen his voice. All GAR personnel, execute Contingency Order 66. This treason can't be left to succeed. Sidious rasped. Why was so dark? The veil of the dark side embraced him like a warm cloak, and there was no more pain. RK equals. You heard the Chancellor. Make sure that his orders gets to the troops. Satine sighed. Am I correct to assume it's meant for precisely this kind of thing? Yes, ma'am. We're to deal with the Jedi if they betray the Republic. The clone answered. This counts, I think. Yes. Excuse me, ma'am. The clone nodded at Satine. You two, stay with the Chancellor and do what you can for him. The rest of you, follow me. We need to get to a comm unit that can burn through the jamming. RK equals. GARHQ Coruscant. There were dozens of gunned or cut-apart clones they had to run over. Even more dead or wounded, not all of whom were part of the security forces. From what Skywalker could see, at least a third of the casualties, if not more, were either officers or technicians who simply worked in here. A lot of them weren't even armed. They were just gunned down for being in the way. As if that wasn't enough to anger the young Jedi even further, what he could feel through the Force would have guaranteed it anyway. Jedi were dying on Coruscant. A lot of them, and some were people who he knew well. People he trained with, friends. When Anakin finally caught up to Teen and his traitors, he was furious. He didn't bother offering them a chance to surrender, even if he could, even if they hadn't been bust taking apart the last squad of a platoon that stood its ground in a futile attempt to stop them. Skywalker wouldn't have done it. He was too angry to even consider it. Instead, he went on the offensive. Just as Teen cut through the last clone in his way, Anakin jumped forward and slammed his lightsaber in the back of a traitor, obviously backing the rogue Jedi Master. Skywalker used the corpse to cushion his fall and whipped his blade up, thus cutting off the left arm of another traitor. The rest of the enemies finally comprehended that they were being hit from behind. However, it was too late. Anakin used the Force to send them all tumbling on the floor behind him, where the sergeant following him and his men could gun them down at their leisure. That left him facing Teen. I should have known. You've chosen the Sith. Teen shook his head and went on the offensive. Those bizarre words caught Anakin off guard and made him pause for a moment. The hell? What Hutt-spawned madness was this? The brief confusion was enough to give Teen the initiative. Their blades clashed and Anakin was forced to take a step back, then another. Skywalker scowled. That bastard attacked Obi-Wan and left him for dead. He couldn't be let to get away. Anakin's anger began enhancing his blows. His speed grew when instead of trying to clear up his head, he embraced it and used it as fuel. The lightsabers slammed in each other with enough power that the hilt in Skywalker's hands actually shook. The blades met again and again. Every attack was anticipated and either parried or avoided by a hairbreadth. Anakin had seldom felt stronger than he did right now, yet Teen was meeting every swing with a ferocious blow of his own. The young Jedi could feel the anger coming from the older man. They were both using that emotion, and to his uncomfortable surprise, they were currently evenly matched. Skywalker grimaced. He needed more power. He had to win to make sure the madness was over so he could go check on Padme. The moment he thought about his wife, his anger shifted. It was a cold thing now, full of determination. What's more, the very thought about Padme, the emotion coming when it recalled a fleeting image of her, it gave Anakin even more strength. He embraced it, welded it to his anger, and pressed forward. For a few seconds, Teen managed to hold his ground, yet then the initiative shifted. Anakin became subtly faster, stronger. This time it was Teen who took a step back. Then another, and the Jedi Master finally lost the initiative. Teen had to continue retreating to avoid Anakin's blade. RK equals. Republic cruiser, Pillar of Eternity, high orbit above Coruscant. Captain, we just got a tight beam transmission from GAR base Cato. GAR HQ is under attack. They've got unconfirmed reports of attacks on the Senate and our R&D facilities planetside and require immediate reinforcements on those locations. Their QRF is already on the way, and they're mobilizing, the comm officer reported. I see. Captain Fal Macquarie nodded. Launch the cap. I want every clone trooper we have, head for the armories and then the hangar. They'll be going planetside soon. Comms, give me a fleet-wide channel. Patch those Oni people in too, the captain ordered. He might have been in charge of just a light cruiser recently. A new hand in running a major vessel, not to mention one of the more junior captains in the Coruscant Defense Fleet, yet none of that meant he didn't know his duty. Their people on the ground needed help now, and he wasn't content to sit by while someone was probably trying to pull off a coup, no matter if it was really the Jedi, the Separatist, or even Oni. You're on, sir. Thank you. This is Captain Fal Macquarie. My ship just received a reinforcements request from GAR base Cato. We've got confirmation of an attack on GAR HQ, as well as possible assault in progress upon the Senate and other vital facilities. I'm dispatching my ground complement with fighter escort as we speak, and I advise you to do the same. Macquarie paused. Director Yiel, I advise you that the force under your command shouldn't interfere with my small craft. Sir, we're being targeted by the ONI squadron. The clone in charge of tactical exclaimed in disbelief. Return the favor. Is our squadron ready to back us up? Renown stands by us, the comm officer reported. Warrior, too. The escorts are moving in to screen us. What about the rest of the fleet? The captain asked while examining the tactical plot. Magnificent is launching fighters and assault shuttles. Vice Admiral Grad is demanding that the ONI ships stand down. Damn it, McQueer cursed. He could clearly see a whole bomber wing swing from their station near the ONI ships and head straight for the Magnificent and Grad. Sir, Admiral Grad is hailing the fleet. Put him on speakers. This is Vice Admiral Grad. I'm assuming command of the fleet. Director Yile, order your bombers to break off and stand out. I won't warn you again. All GAR elements in orbit, launch your ground units ASAP. Priority is securing the Senate, GAR HQ, and all vital Republic military government and civilian facilities planetside. We'll sort out this mess when order down there is restored. That's negative, Admiral Grad. You're interfering with an ONI operation. Stand down, or your action will be considered treason, and I will be forced to open fire, Weil snapped. There was a long pause. This isn't your call to make. Oni answers to GAR High Command and the Navy. You will stand down now, Director. Grad shot back. Macquarie could see the Magnificent's escorts move in to block the bomber's path. The cruiser was launching fighters too, and the captain was sure that its Guardian system was already targeting the incoming small craft. Magnificent, Pillar of Eternity. This is your final warning. Stand down or we'll open fire, Weil ordered. Target her flagship. Weapons, if they open fire, respond in kind. Macauer ordered. In the end, it was the Admiral who acted first. The bombers flying at the Magnificent crossed an invisible line, and the cruiser's Guardian opened fire. Couple of seconds later, the ONI squadron and their allies began firing. Fire at will, Macquarie ordered. Launch the transports when ready and move in to screen them. The captain frowned as he watched the tactical plot. Most of the fleet chose to remain neutral, though almost a third of it was converging on the ONI ships. At least there were dozens of assault shuttles and Elats heading for the surface from the ships whose captains were prudent enough to have them prepare earlier. If he got away clean from this mess, Macauer was going to keep a QRF ready in or near the hangars so they could be deployed at a moment's notice. Then he dismissed that thought and concentrated on the unfolding space battle. Most of Oni's ships were light cruisers and other escorts. Their Cathar and other allies were in fact more dangerous, and the only reason why they might last longer than it would take the ships backing the Admiral to get to grips with them. At least the spooks would be too busy surviving to mess up with the reinforcements dashing to Coruscant. =RK equals Security Center GARHQ Coruscant. Colonel, the jamming is gone. Our comms are still criffed up, but we can at least receive transmissions, a technician exclaimed. Good, get them fixed. Try figuring out what the criff is happening outside. Zack ordered and went over to check for himself. This is Captain Felix Noon of the Senate Guard. Case Black, I say again, Case Black. We're under attack by Jedi and Cathar forces and need immediate reinforcements. All Loyalist GAR personnel, be advised, Oni units are assisting the coup attempt. This is Captain Macauer, from the Pillar of Eternity. Reinforcements are on the way. This is Commander Asp. Identification. Primary is secure. We need reinforcements and medical personnel on site ASAP. The primary is critically wounded. Be advised, we've got Mandalorian personnel on site, and they're friendly. I say again, the Mandos are friendly. Further, I've got an order to transmit from the primary. From what Zack could gather, things outside were just as chaotic as within GAR HQ itself, if not more so. He was about to ask the tech again about the comms when he heard the Chancellor's voice come over an open channel from the Senate. Zack heard the confirmation about a Jedi coup being in progress, heard Palpatine's authorization and identification codes, though what really mattered in the end was just one sentence. Execute Contingency Order 66. It came from the Chancellor. It was lawful, and that's all that mattered. Zack and his brothers were trained even from before birth to obey orders, especially the contingency ones. While technically he had the freedom to disobey, he wasn't really capable of it. Nor did he want to given the circumstances. Get me the comms operational now, Zack snapped to the technicians, and get me on all loudspeakers and comms within the building. =RK equals. This is Colonel Zack. We just got a transmission from the Chancellor. A Jedi coup is confirmed to be in progress. The Chancellor authorized Contingency Order 66. I repeat, execute Order 66. Stand the criff down, both of you, or we'll open fire. You're under arrest. What? Anakin exclaimed. He dared to glance back and froze when he saw all the clones pointing their blasters at him and Teen. Order 66 is in effect. You're under arrest. If you resist, we're to terminate you on the spot, Jedi. The sergeant snapped back. Teen bolted, and the clones opened fire at him. Anakin was forced to deflect a few blaster bolts coming his way, which prompted the soldiers to concentrate on him. I'll stand down. Just stop shooting at me, Skywalker exclaimed. He felt that something was terribly wrong, and somehow knew that right now he was on a crossroads that would determine his future. The clones continued to fire at him, making him slowly fall back. It was only thanks to the armor he wore during his training and the built-in shield that the few shots that passed through his lightsaber didn't prove fatal. Anakin scowled and unleashed a telekinetic wave that sent the clones off their feet. He was torn. What was the right call? Go on the offensive, retreat, surrender, chase Tin. 159. Chapter 39, Parts 1 and 2. Phase 39. Twilight. =RK equals. Throughout Republic space, all non-military holonet transmissions suddenly ceased. They were briefly replaced by the sigil of the Republic, which was proudly displayed above the words "Emergency Broadcast." This unusual state of affairs continued for 20 seconds before it was replaced by the image of a human male who stood behind an empty metal desk. The only thing behind him was a plain green wall, which gave no real clues about the location. "Greetings, citizens of the Republic. I regret the need to address you in this unusual way. My name is Marek Yile, the director of the SBI." He smiled sadly. "If you're watching this transmission, it means that I've failed in my duty to safeguard the Republic, and I am dead before I could warn the Chancellor and the GAR of an imminent and present danger for everything we hold dear. There is a plot to subvert the Republic by parties that already have their claws in both my own agency, the SBI, and at least ONI, the Office of Naval Intelligence. I hope my warning goes out in time. However, if I've underestimated our enemies, you need to know this." Oil took a deep breath. "Our intelligence services aren't the only ones subverted. The same is true for our supposed Mandalorian allies and elements of the Jedi Order as well." Will pressed a button on the computer terminal built into his desk, and a holographic window appeared above his right shoulder. It showed a conversation between a group of Jedi, Director Ivan Fell from ONY and Count Dooku. Their discussion, planning how to cripple the GAR on Coruscant for long enough so they could successfully remove the Chancellor from power. "I believe that the conspirators would initially try to present their coup as an attempt to save the Republic from the Sith." Marek's expression became grave. This couldn't be farther than the truth. Count Dooku's presence, a Sith himself, is evidence enough. They plan to sow confusion, cripple the GAR for long enough that our armed forces are unable to respond in time and eliminate some of the biggest obstacles to their plan. This treason isn't a misguided attempt to protect us from the Sith. On the contrary, it is a Sith plot aimed to destroy the Jedi who would stand against an overthrow of our democratically elected government and the first step in transforming our republic into a Sith empire. Unless the conspirators are stopped, they will blame the murder of Chancellor Palpatine and other officials, both civilians and military, who would have stood on their way, on the Jedi still loyal to the Republic, and thus use the GAR to dispose of them. =RK equals GARHQ Coruscant. For the rest of his life, Anakin Skywalker would wonder if things would have turned better or worse if he made another choice that day. Hindsight wasn't really helpful. It wouldn't be long before he figured out that things might have turned very, very differently. That at least in the short term, he would have been hunted. All those things were obvious, yet none of them helped him figure out if he made the right choice that day. There would be nights in the future when he would lay in bed wondering if his relationship with Padme wouldn't be so rocky if he had chosen to resist his arrest. If he had fled and eventually joined the Jedi who survived Order 66 and weren't convinced to take the deal they were offered by the Senate. A blanket amnesty for those who weren't a part of the coup in exchange for fighting for the Republic. Perhaps he should have resisted. Perhaps he should have ran. Then he might have ended up walking a different path, one that wouldn't eventually lead him into a love-hate relationship with his wife. And no matter what happened to the rest of the galaxy, it might have been worth it. Or perhaps doing so would have doomed him. Anakin never knew, yet kept wondering till his dying day. He often dreamed of that day, of making another choice. Yet perhaps it didn't matter in the end. After knocking that pain in the arse of a sergeant and his men off their feet, Anakin didn't run. He didn't cut them down. He didn't fight. Instead, he deactivated his lightsaber, levitated it to the ground between himself and the clones, and then raised his hands as a sign of surrender. "I don't resist. I'm giving up as you instructed." Until his dying day, Anakin Skywalker would wonder what exactly went through the troopers' heads at that moment. He could sense their distress. For a moment, Anakin was sure that they would open fire anyway, and he wasn't certain he could survive. "On your knees, hands behind your head. If I even think you're trying to pull one of your Jedi tricks, we'll shoot," the sergeant barked. Anakin glared at the clone. He was sorely tempted to lash out with the Force, yet he squashed that desire along with his rising anger and simply nodded. Then Skywalker silently followed the instructions. He was led to a detention center in the lower floors of the building, and along the way, he got an ever-increasing guard detail. By the time he was secured in a cell, Anakin was sure that there was at least a company in his immediate vicinity, and there were more soldiers not too far away. Skywalker was both proud that they considered him such a threat and resentful towards the implication that he would turn on the people who he fought beside since the war began. The worst thing was that Anakin had only himself to blame for his predicament, and he knew it very well. Not that such an admission made him feel any better. "Can someone tell me what's happening?" Anakin turned towards the door and asked. He knew that there were a lot of guards nearby. He could feel their presence. His only answer was silence and the unpleasant things that he could sense through the Force. RK equals. Part 2. RK equals. Flag bridge, Corellian cruiser Freedom, hyperspace. When Joanna Holt entered the flag bridge, she shivered. The large compartment was mostly dark and very, very cold. "Admiral, we have some unforeseen complications." A voice rasped from the twilight. It was somewhat familiar. It sounded not unlike that of General Vale, yet it was different too. This voice belonged to an old man, one nearing the end of his life, not to someone in their mid-30s at worst. The twilight shifted to reveal a figure hunched over the conference table. There was a steaming cup with something bubbling inside that the stranger found quite fascinating. It took Joanna more than a few moments to reconcile skin with the tone of an ancient parchment and white hair, with only a few wisps of grey with the general she knew. "Vale, what did you do to yourself?" Holt snapped before she could think things through. "My reach exceeded my grasp." The Sith rasped again and raised his head to look him in the eyes. This wasn't the same man she knew. It wasn't just his sudden change of age, it was his eyes. They were like two yellow stars blazing angry in the void of space. "What do you really know about the Force, about her limits?" That question took her off guard. This wasn't a time for a religious discussion, damn it. Joanna's anger grew as she watched Vale's lips twitch into a ghost of a smile. "This wasn't a rhetorical question, Admiral. I've seen Jedi fight. I've felt you connect this whole fleet into a single whole. I can't explain it." A shiver went down her spine. "I felt crimson." Joanna spat the world as if it was a curse. "Whatever this Force of yours is, it's very much real." Holt eventually answered, after she shackled her anger and drove it under the durasteel veil of her professionalism. "It is. There are very few limits on what's possible with it." The general nodded slowly and tapped the cup in front of him with a finger. That was enough to make the liquid inside bubbling increase into a sizzling hiss that threw droplets all over the metal table. They began eating through the surface with a hiss of an angry reptile. "What is that?" Joanna asked. "Something impossible to brew without the Force." Vale sighed. "A way for me to be useful when we hit Camino after I literally burned through my body." "I hope there's some kind of explanation incoming," Joanna grumbled. That man was going to be the death of her. What in the name of all Corellian hells did he do, and why the bloody hells did he do it now, when they were about to enter battle? "An explanation." Vale glared at his cup. "I can give you many. There are few limits to what a powerful Force adept could achieve with the Force, enhancing our bodies, influencing whole fleets, making contact with people on the other side of the galaxy, if the situation is either right or wrong enough." He trailed off. "I take it's the latter case." Joanna was almost sure of it. At the end, something shifted in Vale's tone. Was that regret? "I'll ask again. What did you do, General?" "I sensed the Force trembling with shocks. Jedi dying on Coruscant. I needed to know what in the name of the Force was happening. I needed to know that my wife was all right." Joanna frowned. Vale's voice almost broke there. And Jedi dying on Coruscant? How the criff did the Separatists reach the capital? It wasn't the Confederacy. Vale hissed in fury as if reading her mind, and wasn't that a terrifying idea? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "I was able to latch on the strongest Force signature on Coruscant. Used it as an anchor to get a glimpse of what the criff was happening. To find my wife." Vale spoke in a dull, distant tone, yet every word echoed a depth of fury Joanna was simply unable to comprehend. For a brief moment, Holt was tempted to claim he was lying. That what he was talking about was impossible. However, she knew better. What Crimson did, what she knew for sure Vale could do. So much power concentrated in the hands of a single man whose allegiance she was unsure of simply terrified her. On the other hand, as the former captain of the Freedom and now as an admiral, Joanna herself had more power at her fingertips than most people across the galaxy could comprehend. The real difference was control, checks and balances. She simply couldn't burn a world at her whim or go conquer one without good reasons that were approved by her superiors back home. Vale, on the other hand, he himself was a weapon, and right now Joanna doubted that anyone but himself had ever been in control of his actions. "What did you see?" Joanna asked, while her mind was busy going over worst-case scenarios. "Mace Windu crushing my wife's chest. Chancellor Palpatine dying." Vale's words were quietly, yet Holt couldn't help it but feel a terror when she heard his voice. He sounded like someone on the edge of madness, just a heartbeat away from becoming berserk. She certainly didn't expect him to smile mirthlessly. "The Jedi pulling a stab in the back I didn't see coming. It's almost commendable." If what Vale was telling her was true, if the CIS hadn't found a back door toward Coruscant, or even worse, somehow swept all resistance leading towards the capital, it actually made a twisted amount of sense. It was no secret that there were a lot of Jedi who saw Vale as a threat. That, because he was a Sith, he was the enemy they had to fight instead of the Confederacy. Joanna wasn't blind, nor deaf. She knew that those Jedi had some support in the Senate. It was at least plausible that they might have moved to cut off the people supporting Vale back home while he was far away. If the man was telling her the truth, if he wasn't mistaken, if he wasn't lying for some reason or another. Too many ifs. Too much that was uncertain. In the end, everything went to one simple question: did she trust Vale? Still, during that battle meditation of his, Joanna had touched his mind, both above Geonosis and when they had to burn down Crimson. She knew she could reasonably trust the man who won second Geonosis. She could admire the man who somehow turned the whole fleet into a single entity to protect them against Crimson. Joanna wasn't so sure about the man hunched above her conference table. "I criffed up, Joanna. I've been criffing up and making things as I went, ever since arriving in this bright future." Vale sighed. "Do you know the real reason why I initially supported the Republic? Why I just went on with it once I made peace with everything I knew being dust for millennia? I was content. I didn't have the Dark Council to worry about. I was back in command of a military unit and in the thick of things." Vale smiled wishfully. "I was lazy too." He sighed and finally looked back at her. "Why do you fight, Admiral Holt? For the Republic? For Corellia? Or for your family, friends, and the men and women under your command? Why do you fight, General?" It was impolite to answer a question with the question, yet Joanna needed to know. She felt it was vital to hear Vale answer, and more importantly believe it if he gave her one that she felt acceptable. In the same time, her gut instinct was to say she fought for the Republic, for Corellia. It was an easy answer, the easy answer. It was true too. It just was far from the whole truth. "Because it's my nature. Because I thrive on the chaos and madness of combat." Vale smiled sadly. "To keep the few close to my heart safe." She almost missed the last words he whispered. "Something I failed, yet again. Because it's my duty, to those under my command, to my people, for my family and friends," Joanna muttered. He was a Sith, and vengeance was a part of his nature. "What do we do now, General?" Joanna asked. Vale stared at his drink, then grabbed it in a single sure motion and downed it in one swing. "Gah! This tastes criff." The general spluttered. Joanna would have found his antics amusing if it wasn't for the changes that occurred with his body. His hair began turning metal grey, and the complexion of his skin changed too, as a healthy colour bled back into it. His back straightened, and Joanna was sure that his very muscles became bigger to fill back his clothes in the way he looked, before whatever turned him into an old man occurred. "Huh, 2 moths or so. A bit better than I feared," Vale muttered to himself. 2 months, Joanna inquired, while still staring at the slowing down changes. When they finally stopped, the general still looked much older than he originally appeared, but it was a far cry from the ancient apparition that waited for her on the flag bridge a few minutes ago. That's how long I've got left, unless I find a way to permanently fix up my body. On the bright side, I'm back in the game. Now he sounded much younger too. We've got some contingency planning to do, Admiral. Unless you think it would be prudent to throw me in the brig and space the key. Now that he brought up that idea, Joanna was tempted. Doing so might be good for her sanity. Criffing Sith, 160th Chapter 39. Parts 3 and 4. Phase 39, Twilight, equals RK equals. Part 3, Tipoca City, Camino. It was fitting, I think. The furious storm trying to tear down the city around us was a good reflection of my surging emotions. A massive lightning bolt slammed into a nearby building, lighting up the night. The resulting deafening cracking thunder struck with such a force that for a split second the waterfall like rain was blown away, letting me get a good look at Ramesses and the squad of troopers behind him. I glared at the bastard and smiled coldly. Another lightning bolt struck, this time to the light, and the flash illuminated a robed figure sprinting towards us from behind the Jedi Master. For a moment I wondered what Shaak Ti was going to do. Even drenched, she was easy to recognize in the twilight. However, I found it hard to care. The Jedi did it again. Bearing a miracle, Bo was dead. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't sense her in the Force. Perhaps she was merely critically wounded and her signature was faint. Perhaps I didn't have the strength left to sense someone who wasn't Force-sensitive all the way to Coruscant. Or the more likely scenario, my wife wasn't able to survive her chest being crushed. My wife? Murdered. By a criffing Jedi. Why the criff didn't I join the Confederacy and ensured that they burned down the whole Republic and every single damn Jedi? I glared at Ramesses, who was simply waiting for Shaak Ti's arrival. I glanced at her when she finally made her way to stand beside the older Jedi Master. Ti looked like hell, and not just because the heavy rain had turned her robes into a sodding mess. That sight brought a thin, cruel smile to my face. I could almost taste my vengeance unfolding. Master Ramesses, Master Ti, I greeted with as much false cheer I could muster. It wasn't a lot. Veil, the snake hissed back. His clawed hand went to the hilt of his blade. Your madness ends tonight. Madness? I tasted the word and smirked. The only madmen I see are you, Jedi. A coup at this time? Your stunt is a worthy of Sith, I taunted. The news came just an hour ago, mere minutes after we arrived in system. Even when I was able to sense what was happening through the Force, I still found the truth hard to believe. The Jedi pulling such a stunt at this juncture. I underestimated the bastards. Under other circumstances, what they did would have been something I could respect. Admire even. Despite my precautions, the Chancellor was officially critically wounded, though I knew the truth. The Jedi somehow offed Palpatine. I sensed his death after all. At least he was able to activate Order 66, something I should thank him if I ever met his Force ghost. That's why I was down here instead of coordinating an evacuation alongside Holt and Tarkin the Elder. I needed blood to satisfy my thirst for vengeance. Congratulations, Jedi. Your friends murdered Chancellor Palpatine, the most respected and beloved Chancellor in centuries. I chuckled darkly. Well done, Order 66 is in effect. So I offer you my congratulations once again. Today you doomed all the Jedi across the galaxy. What did you do? Ti exclaimed. She could sense I was telling the truth. Well, mostly. What we had to... Ramesses hissed and pulled out his weapon. A blue blade came to life and began sizzling as raindrops fell upon it only to evaporate before they could touch it. The armored men behind the Jedi spread out and leveled sonic blasters at me. Had to? Yes, I can see it. Mace Windu had no other choice than to murder my wife. I nodded. That might even have been true. Bo wasn't someone to just back off from a challenge. It doesn't matter, Jedi. Your kind robbed me from my wife again. Ti flinched at my words. She knew what I did the last time. Yet another lightning bolt lit up the skies. I could see Ti steeling her resolve. I can't allow you to wreak vengeance upon the Jedi, no matter what Windu did, she declared. You know, there's a part of me that hoped you would say something like that. I nodded and let go the hold I've been keeping upon my fury ever since arriving in system. My lightsaber jumped into my open palm, and Rancisi's soldiers opened fire. Finally, my vengeance was at hand. Equals RK equals. Part 4, Tipoca City, Camino. Cold fingers gripped Shaak Ti's spine, and it wasn't because of the icy sheets of rain whipping at her drenched robes. She wasn't a stupid woman by any means. The short conversation between Rancisis and Vale made all the pieces fall together. "What did you do?" The exclamation fell from her lips before the Jedi Master could help it. Tai stared at Vale. While she couldn't see his expression thanks to the helmet he wore, the man felt almost calm in the Force. She knew better. Last time his vengeance had been mostly targeted at those responsible for Ashara's death, even if Vale hadn't really cared if he had to burn whole worlds to get to them. Because he knew his first wife wouldn't like him to eradicate the Jedi Order as a whole because of what happened to her. This time it was different. He had no reason to hold back. No reason to spare any Jedi who wouldn't follow him, perhaps not even then. And that wasn't something Shaak Ti could allow. Not something that she could live with, even if she believed that what the Council apparently did was sheer madness. Going after Vale, fair enough. Launching a coup. Taking out the Chancellor while the war was going this badly, sheer madness. Yet she had only Vale's words about what really happened on Coruscant. He didn't feel like he was lying, so he might very well believe his words. They might be the truth as well. However, there were still Jedi dying all over the galaxy after what felt like scores being cut down in a very short period of time. No matter what happened on Coruscant, no matter what some of the Jedi might have done, Shaak Ti simply couldn't support someone who was going to go after every one of her comrades. "I can't allow you to wreak vengeance upon the Jedi, no matter what Windu did," she declared. "You know, there's a part of me that hoped you would say something like that." Shaak Ti knew Vale was smiling when he said those words. Only then he did release the grip he had upon his emotions, and what she felt coming from him almost brought her to her knees. Shaak Ti had never sensed such uncontrolled fury. Bloodlust emanated from Vale like a cloak, and she knew he had to stop him now. No matter what could have been, no matter what either the Jedi or he had done, he had to be stopped. Because the way he felt in the Force, Shaak Ti was sure that right now, Vale would cheerfully set the whole galaxy on fire just to enjoy watching it burn. Equals RK equals. Something in Vale's presence shifted, and the Force screamed. Rancisis was barely able to bring his lightsaber up and brace himself when a solid wall of Sith lighting slammed into him. The corrupted energy coming at the Jedi Master was grounded by his blade, yet tendrils somehow whipped around and rend gorges into his armor, no matter how much Force energy he pumped into a barrier to protect himself. Beside him, Shaak Ti was doing the same with a bit more success. Forks of lighting twisted around her blade, only to disappear just before they could touch her flesh. The Cathar commandos who came with the Jedi Master weren't so fortunate. They managed to send few shots at Vale before the lighting storm literally picked them up and sent them flying off the platform. Rancisis felt them die screaming before they hit the water. The onslaught was over as suddenly as it began. The Jedi knew what was going to happen and left himself be submerged into the Force. He felt its power surge through his body, and the dark night suddenly became clear as a day. The Force was on his side. It would guide his actions and ensure that the Sith end today. There was no doubt in Rancis's mind. It didn't matter how strong Vale was in the dark side. The Force had always been more powerful than a Sith could really grasp. Rancisis knew it, for he was one with the Force. He was its tool to restore the balance in the galaxy. When the blood-red blade came for him, the Jedi Master was ready and at peace. Equals RK equals. Vale was acting sloppy, lost in his rage. Shaak Ti could see openings in his stance, ready to be exploited. This should have been a fight they could win. Perhaps the best chance to stop this insanity the Jedi would ever get. Obviously no one told that to Vale. The dark side surrounded him like an armor. It was a pulsing tumor in the Force that made it almost painful to look at the Sith. As Vale tore at Rancisis, Shaak Ti moved to flank him and end it then and there. It didn't appear that the Sith paid her any attention. His flank was wide open as he slammed his blade in the Jedi Master's guard again and again. Shaak Ti sprinted through the sheets of rain and swung down, aiming to take Vale's arm at the shoulder. The dark side surrounding him grew more solid and gathered around his free hand. Ty's blade came slashing down, and to her eternal shock bounced off a spot of pure darkness that soon became a caricature of a clawed gauntlet that formed around Vale's left hand. The Sith never slowed his onslaught against Rancisis, yet he pointed straight at her. Tears made of the dark side itself manifested above Vale and elongated, becoming black spears that absorbed what little light illuminated the landing path. Ty didn't need the Force's empathic warning to know she needed to be anywhere but where she stood. The Togruta jumped back, barely avoiding the first spear. It slammed into the metal floor and went through it as if it was made of butter. Just coming to be so close to the damned thing made her feel unclean. Shakti shivered in revulsion and continued to move back as the remaining spears flew her way. It was only thanks to the Force that she somehow succeeded in avoiding the onslaught. Only one spear came close to burying into her side. It ripped through the outer layer of her robe and dissolved the armored fabric. The mere backslash hitting her skin sent needles of ice boring straight into her nerves and made her scream at the touch of the dark side itself. A heartbeat later, Shakti figured out that she wasn't the only one screaming. Rancisis was moving like a lighting, using his serpentine speed and agility to keep up with Vale. They tore through the falling rain, leaving strings of steam before it was washed away. Rancisis was good, very good. Any other opponent would be on the back foot when facing such speed and ability. Vale matched the Jedi Master blow for blow and didn't look like he would be slowing down anytime soon. Shakti had to change that. She ran towards the Sith while pulling more and more of the Force into her body in order to make herself even more powerful. She had to end this now. Ty was already halfway there when went right into Rancisis' face. For a moment it appeared that their lightsabers were pressed between them and they had cut down each other. Yet that illusion was proven as a lie in the next heartbeat. Rancisis flew away to slide over the drenched catwalk leading to the landing pad, and he was howling in pain. Before Shakti got close enough to jump at Vale, she was sure she saw the Jedi Master's right side cave into a swirl of darkness. The Sith turned to face her in the last possible moment, and their blades met for the first time that night. Red and blue blades cut short-lived gaps in the torrential rain as they fought for domination. At that moment, Shakti knew that if Vale was in his right mind, she would already be dead. If he used the skill she knew he possessed instead raw power and fury, he would have cut her down within moments. Yet he didn't. Ty fell into a defensive stance and began giving ground, taunting him to come after her, waiting for an opening she could exploit. Eventually, Vale's fury got the better of him. He overextended and Shakti was ready for it. He used all the force she could to give her a sudden burst of speed. Vale went for her feint and tried to slam it into her heart. Shakti winced when the blade burned through her robe, grazed her breast, making her howl in pain, and seared the skin and muscle over a rib. However, the pain didn't slow her down enough. The Jedi's own saber struck true straight at the elbow joint of Vale's sword arm. His deflector failed, the armor's weak point gave in, and she took off his arm with a single force-enhanced swing. The backstroke sliced an angry glowing line in his chest. Unfortunately, this time the armor held, if barely enabling the Sith to jump back. For a moment, Shakti couldn't believe that it worked. She crippled him. She won. When she found her footing, Vale appeared different. Shakti was sure he was looking at her curiously. "To think that there would be a Jedi in this era who could match me," he said in wonder. "It's over," Shakti said. "Over?" He looked down at his still smoking stump. "It's such a pity things turned out this way, Master Ty." Vale nodded in respect. "Stand down." "This doesn't need to end in any more blood," Ty pleaded. "No one else needed to die." "Right." The Force shook as it screamed of the danger she was in. A crimson blur came from the darkness below the catwalk. Shakti acted on instinct and parried the spinning lightsaber. However, as she met that first attack, the Jedi Master knew it was too late. The next onslaught came into the form of a dark blur that splashed over her and covered the Jedi into the nauseating stench of the dark side. Her perception dulled, and she knew that whatever Vale did was going to slow her down. Despite that, Ty managed to parry the following strike, which came from Rancisis' levitated saber. As she battered the weapon away, Shakti managed to get a glimpse of her fellow Jedi Master. He was still alive, somehow, but wasn't long for this world. Ramesses was blissfully unconscious and unable to feel the dark side dissolving his flesh. Already almost half his chest was gone, and the dark energy eating at him was far from done. Shakti didn't see the next attack coming. Vale was suddenly in front of her, and he slammed his remaining hand into her gut. The sheer power behind that punch lifted her off her feet, and the next thing T knew was the cold metal of the catwalk kissing her cheek. An armored boot kicked her lightsaber out of her hand, sending it flying into the ocean below. The Jedi lashed at Vale with the Force, yet her desperate attack slammed into and bounced off an unyielding barrier. A telekinetic grip closed around Shakti and hoisted her into the air. "I owe you one, you know. You broke me out of my funk," Vale explained. "You can't stop me either." "Such a pity." Vale's voice came from very far away. "Don't worry, you aren't going to die here. I still have a use for you, my dear." Shakti's darkening mid was momentarily taken aback by the almost gentle tone Vale spoke in. Then blissful darkness claimed her, and there was no more pain.